Some people were here last year or in Sydney for the Mises seminar. If you came back this year, you must have liked it last year. My talk last year was on home education. In the last 3 months, our New South Wales state government has basically outlawed home education, very quietly, while they've been outlawing in Queensland riding motorbikes in a group with a tattoo or something like that. And that's been a little bit more noisy. The New South Wales government has been targeting a very small minority group called home educators. You're allowed to run a school at home as long as you do all of the compliance that a school principal would do, as long as you can categorically prove that you do not innovate in any way, that you do not deviate from the national curriculum, even to the age bracket. That is, you can't teach above or below the prescribed age bracket unless you can prove in all of the right jargon why you've got a verifiable reason to do that. You can be deregistered. So this is something that has a massive impact on registered homeschoolers. We think anecdotally that most homeschoolers are not registered, but 2,800 of my friends are, and they're under attack in New South Wales. They've got a petition to the New South Wales government. They need 10,000 signatures. They're 656 signatures away from that. So I wonder if I could ask for your help in signing that petition. I didn't write the petition. Don't worry about. We've put some of them on the tables, only brought 8. If you could just, once your table's done with it, pass it to another table, that would be very much appreciated, and I'll send that to my registered homeschooling friends. It's a bit like registration of anything, registering your pet lizards, or registering your gold, or registering your firearms. At first it's very friendly. Up until 3 months ago, registering as a homeschooler meant a very nice old lady in a cardigan would come round for a cup of tea once a year and say, "My, haven't they grown?" And that was it. It was quite a pleasant experience, from what I've been told. Now they're replacing those old ladies with the Gestapo. A little bit of an exaggeration, but that's where it's headed. So thank you for that. That's not my talk today, though.
But before you go on, is it the same rules for schools?
They're basically, you're forced to be a school.
Yeah,
You're forced to do school at home, which is the reason people home educate, is in order to not do school, to do it differently in some way, to innovate in some way. You have to prove that you do not innovate, which takes away the reason that people do it in the first place, mostly. And even those that are teachers who actually do want to do it the government way are still complaining because they're saying we're going to have to spend half our time on compliance instead of teaching our kids. So even those that want to do it that way are complaining. But I better move on so we don't spend all our time on that. What we're talking about today is entrepreneurship, and especially kids and entrepreneurship. I wanted to cheekily title it The Brighter Side of Child Labour, but we didn't want the negative connotation. But for most of human history, how much of someone's lifetime did they spend outside of the regular workforce? Hazard a guess, maybe 5 years at the beginning of your life when you're just physically not capable of doing very much work. But basically anybody who can work must work for most of human history. That's just the state of it. It's not that parents were bad up until a few years ago. It's just the state of nature, that nature doesn't provide very much on its own that you can just pick up off the ground. You have to work. And if you're working with primitive tools, your work is not very productive. And so everybody has to work just for a pretty meagre existence. And that's what most of human history has been like. You might have got a few years, and there might have been a few pharaohs and Caesars and people like that who got to live in luxury while serfs or slaves or whoever did the work. But those were a very small minority. Even in an egalitarian society like a tribe, not everybody lived like pharaohs, did they? They lived more like peasants. That's just how it was. And also you're part of a family, and that's what the family does. So what else are you going to do with your time other than do what the rest of the family does? Even 100 years ago, it took 200 years of industrial revolution just to eke out a few more years of childhood. Just to have the luxury of spending 12 years out of the workforce took until about the late 1800s, early 1900s. My grandfather's born about 100 years ago. Actually, my grandpa is 100, turns 101 in January. Started work as a teenager, in the early 1900s, it's not that parents were still bad, hadn't learned to be good parents yet. It's just that it takes a lot of generations to build up capital stock and technology to make us productive enough to have the luxury of not working. And they build up a bit of luxury, but still not nearly as much as we have today. If you went back in time and imposed a standard that said nobody is allowed to work until they're 20 or 18 or 25 or any arbitrary age, all you would do is make people starve to death, because that's just the reality of how things were. And at the other end of your life, how much time do you spend in retirement? None. My 100-year-old grandpa has spent 35 years in retirement, being very healthy and active and so on. But people in the time he was born retired. Well, the life expectancy in 1900 in England was 50 years. So you might have 3 months of being debilitated in your bed before you die, but it's not a retirement that you get to enjoy, because your life expectancy was 50 years. In 1800, life expectancy was 37 years. I'd already be dead. What about today? Well, you can, not that everybody does, but you can spend 25 years before you enter the workforce. Some of us had a family and a mortgage and a business by 25, but I teach some students who are taking 6 years to do a 3-year degree. And at the other end of your life also, you can spend 25 years in retirement, or like my grandpa, 35 years and counting. How did we get to that state? Was it because we suddenly discovered the value of education and leisure, like no one had ever heard of it before? No, I don't think so. It's because we're productive enough in the in-between years to pay for it, right? In that time, firstly there is, if you only live 50 years, you cut off 25 years at the beginning and 25 years at the end, you'd have no time to work, right? So firstly, we're living long enough, and also we're productive enough in between to pay for our kids' education, to pay for our parents' retirement or our own retirement in the future. Not only are we twice as productive, if we were twice as productive, we could have the same meagre subsistence level life, working half as many hours, right? But not many people want that, right? So, but we're 100 times more productive. So therefore, we get to buy out some of our time as leisure time, and we get to live a much higher living standard as well. And that's due to productivity, because, stopped working, because it's just the nature of life that if you are spending all your time in a blacksmith shop making a few horseshoes, well, a few horseshoes is all you have to sell. And whatever the value of those horseshoes is what you have to live on. If you're spending your time in a factory making aeroplane wings, because you've got capital equipment there, it's making your work, your labour more productive. And that's why you get to buy out some leisure time for you or your children. If you're digging with a spade, how much can you dig? We have to mould the matter around us to make it more inhabitable. But if you're digging with a earth-moving machine like that, one person's labour can move a whole lot more earth, or plough a whole lot more of a field, or whatever the job is that you're doing. One person with a computer with Excel can replace a whole lot of people with an abacus, right? Just moving goods from where they're lower valued, like in the orchard, to where they're higher valued, like in the city, how much more can one person driving the B-double transport compared to one person on the bicycle? And it's that productivity that lets us buy out that leisure time. And that's the difference between rich and poor countries. In poor countries, they're still driving the bicycles. They haven't over time built up the capital stock that makes them more productive. Whatever the reason for that, tyranny, inflation, theft, whatever the reason that people have not over the generation, we all started off using horse-drawn ploughs and spades or our bare hands in all cultures. But in some cultures over generations and generations, people have built up capital stock to make them more productive. In some places they haven't, or they have but it got stolen off them for whatever reason. I've got a few Jeffrey Tucker quotes in this talk. Because productivity made child labour optional, because I don't believe that all parents in the past were just bad parents, productivity is what made the negative aspects of child labour redundant. Like, we don't actually need the labour of the children because the labour of the people in between is so much more productive. So it was technology, innovation, capitalism that made child labour optional. But when you go and impose child labour laws that say you must not let children work, child labour laws generally were driven by labour unions pushing governments because they didn't want price competition. All right? So they said, you need to ban children from working. Banning children from working didn't overcome the negative aspects of child labour. Those were already overcome by the free market. But what it did do is it destroyed the positive aspects of children working, the educational value of children being able to learn what you need to do to survive in the world, to be productive. So a quote from Jeffrey Tucker's The Trouble with Child Labour Laws: "We know the glorious lessons that are imparted from productive work. What lesson do we impart with child labour laws? We establish early on who is in charge. Not individuals, not parents, but the state. We tell youth they have nothing to offer society until they are 18 or so. Work is a form of exploitation from which they must be protected. We drive a huge social wedge between parents and children and lead children to believe they have nothing to learn from their parents' experience. We rob them of what might otherwise be the most valuable early experiences of their young adulthood." John Taylor Gatto says, "I feel ashamed that so many of us cannot imagine a better way to do things than locking children up in cells instead of letting them grow up, knowing their families, mingling with the real world, assuming real obligations, striving to be independent and self-reliant and free." In other words, to be a producer, not just a dependent, but to be a producer you can't do when you're locked away in school. So I want to just share with you a few of the things that we do in our family to help train our kids to be entrepreneurial, to value being a producer. We run various home businesses that kids can't go out and just walk down the street and knock on every shop window and say, "Got any jobs?" I'm talking kids from when they're 7 or 8. But you can run a family business. So we look for family businesses that we can run that are kid-friendly, that you work on weekends or outside of normal hours, that it's not in an aggressive environment, where it's a friendly environment, like a kid's party, or like selling pets, or like even milking a cow. We've done various things like this. I'll just show you this video that my kids made 3 years ago. If it works, I apologise for the sound quality. If it's too bad, just cover your ears and we'll turn down the sound and you can still get the message from the pictures. But my kids made this video totally off their own bat, totally out of whatever software just happened to be on a home computer, because I know nothing myself about making videos. It's purely their idea.
I'm Sam. And I'm John.
This is talking about our go-karting business that the kids run. We'll try and get it up for you. They were 11 and 9 when they made the video. But a kids' party, as you can imagine, is somewhere where people are always friendly. People are always happy at a kids' party. You notice that?
We both help our dad with go-kart party. Set everything up in your backyard or in parks or halls, etc. And we give them a little safety talk and bring four on because there's 4 cars, and we tell them actually how to drive up to that. So I'm just going to tell you how to drive. So go, you put your foot down on that pedal, and then to stop, you take your foot off. Okay, that one does nothing. Okay, and if you accidentally crash, you just take your foot off the pedal, wait, and we'll come and straighten you out. Okay. And if you're catching up with someone, try not to get more than this close. If you get more than this close to anyone, just take your foot off the pedal and wait, and yeah, let them go. Okay?
3 to 10 years old. But sometimes you've got to help the 3-year-olds.
I'm not about to crash, but if they do crash, sometimes we've got to come and sort of straighten them out.
You hand out a go-kart driving license.
raise cockatiels and then sell them. Raise cockatiels so they're tame and then we sell them. We feed them out of a syringe, like a measuring syringe, and just squirt it into their mouth.
Some of them, they fly away. You just have to, sometimes you clip their wings when they get too frightened. These are only two of the ways that kids can be in business.
But all kids can be a business kid.
So the kids run real businesses and they earn real money. And in our family, we don't pay pocket money, like an allowance, just for existing. Our kids have never heard of that. Paying an allowance is like training kids to be on the dole. You know, there's this authority figure with a bottomless pit of money that never runs out. The only thing required of you is to exist and to pester. And whatever you get, you spend and then ask for more. It doesn't matter whether you spend it on daily consumer items like hot chocolate or lollies, or whether you want something bigger. You just spend it and then you go and ask for whatever the other thing was as an entitlement as well, right? And so in our family, kids earn real money for doing real work. You don't get anything just for nothing. You don't earn any money just from cleaning your bedroom or stacking the dishwasher or whatever. Those are just things that's consumption, right? We're consumers of food and plates and dishes and clean bedrooms and so on. That's not production. That doesn't bring in any money. That's just something that's required of you if you want to live in a household, in a family. So they only get money for doing something that is actually productive for other people, that brings in family income. That's just how they think. And we try not to nag our kids. It's hard sometimes, but we try not to nag them about being a saver, not a spender. I think that's something that kids have to work out for themselves by trial and error. If a kid is saving up for a motorbike or a MacBook or something big, and they're also buying a hot chocolate every time we go out for $4, it's going to take them much longer to save up for that motorbike, right? And they've got to work that out for themselves. I don't think that that's a fixed character trait that we have to somehow instill in them, be a saver, not a spender. I think that's something that you work out. I think something that is more of a character trait that we want to instill is to be a producer, not a dependent. Here's Ruslan Kogan. He's worth $315 million. He's 30 years old. He's one of the richest self-made 30-year-olds in the world. He grew up in a housing commission flat, Russian immigrant parents, but ran 20 businesses from the time he was 10 years old. He learned it by doing. He learned to work out what it is that people value and want to pay for. Jeffrey Tucker on Facebook the other day, I don't know whether this was a quote from another article or not, it was a nice one. The path forward for libertarianism and those who love freedom is entrepreneurship and innovation. Let no state or oppressor keep you from paving a new path forward for humanity. That's just a nice little succinct quote. The next part of my talk is a little bit more about economics and a little bit more about history. I want to say, why do we need to even say that? Why is that not just obvious? Why can't we just go back to the previous slide and go, duh? If you want to make $315 million, do something productive. and learn that from childhood, why do so many adults need to be sort of re-educated or told for the first time that entrepreneurship is a good and important thing to do? So I've been reading Rothbard's Austrian Perspective on the History of Economic Thought, 2 volumes. They're each 500 pages. They're thick. It's heavy going if you want to read all of that. But the Mises Institute, you only basically pay for the media that it's on. If you buy that book, you're basically paying for the printing cost of that book. If you want to download it for free, you can download it for free. And even the audio version. So this is how I consume thick books like this. It'd take me a long time to read through that, but I have an hour commute each way to work. And that's a long time to be listening. So Jeff Riggenbach has done audio recordings of all of these works, even Man, Economy and State, even Human Action, all the thickest ones and countless other books are all narrated very high quality, hours and hours by Jeff Riggenbach. You get it from the Mises Institute. And so you can easily consume, and you only pay for the media. So if you download it, free. If you want it all on a CD, $2. Just the cost of the CD. Quite amazing. But in that, he goes through the history of economic thought and says, where did this go astray? He goes right back to Aristotle. He goes back a couple of thousand years. And the introduction to the book, he poses the question, is economics an onward and upward journey into the light? Or is it zigzagging in the fog? He comes down on the ladder. But the onward and upward view of history is that in the beginning there was nothing, and then Adam Smith created economics. And then we had this journey where it was added to by David Ricardo and John Stuart Mill and Alfred Marshall and polished off by John Maynard Keynes, perfected. And the only thing left for modern economists to do is just to keep presenting this and iron out minute little problems on the edges, right? But basically, everything builds from Adam Smith to the brilliance of Ben Bernanke or whoever is around today, right? That's the onward and upward view. Rothbard's view is very different to that. He says there can be, therefore, be no presumption whatever in economics that later thought is better than earlier, or even that well-known economists have contributed their sturdy might to the developing discipline. For it becomes very likely that rather than everyone contributing to an ever-progressing edifice, economics can and has proceeded in a contentious, even zigzag fashion, with later systemic fallacy, sometimes elbowing aside earlier but sounder paradigms, thereby redirecting economic thought down a totally erroneous or even tragic path. The overall path of economics may be up or it may be down over any given time period. He goes on to say, in recent years, economics under the dominant influence of formalism, positivism and econometrics, Nick Hubble wouldn't know anything about that, and preening itself on being a hard science, has displayed little interest in its own past. It has been intent, as in any real science, on the latest textbook or journal article rather than exploring its own history. After all, do contemporary physicists spend much time poring over 18th century optics? So we don't look at the past, we just assume that the past is all sorted out. That is, that economics in the past was all set in stone. But really the central thesis of these 2 volumes is that it really went astray with Adam Smith, with the so-called free market guy, who wasn't really at all. So before Adam Smith, if you go back through 2,000 years of history, you see people over the ages debating this, but especially he cites the Spanish scholastics and others, Italians and Dutch and French and so on. But supply and demand, not just supply and demand, but subjective demand, that is value, only comes from human action. Value comes from people's action in making decisions and assigning things value based on their own subjective valuation of things. That's demand. And people's willingness to supply things, or not, is what's going to determine supply and demand and ultimately determine prices or values of things. This was worked out, this is pre-Austrian. This is something that was put into today's language by people like Karl Menger and Bomberwerk. But this was known before that, in the 1600s. Only a fool would try to separate these values in such a way that the legal price should differ from the natural. Foolish, nay wicked, the ruler, who orders that a thing that the common people value at, let us say, at 5, should be sold for 10. Men are guided in these things by the common estimation founded on the consideration of the quality of things. That's their subjective demand, I've put in that word. And of their abundance or scarcity, in other words, their supply. It would be vain for a prince to seek to undermine these principles of commerce. 'Tis best to leave them intact instead of assailing them by force to the public detriment. In other words, the argument for free markets was already there before Adam Smith. And the labour theory of value had been explored time and time again and thoroughly discredited. Again, this is 1605, this source. But if the merchant's expenses have been greater, that is his hard luck, and the common price may not be increased for that reason, just as it need not be decreased even if he had no expenses at all. This is just the merchant's situation. Just as he can make a profit if he has small expenses, so he can lose if his expenses are large or extraordinary. That things don't get value because of the amount of labour that you put into it. If you spend, 1,000 hours trying to dig for a diamond and all you dig up is a rock, well, that rock doesn't have value based on the time you spent looking for it. It has value. You've just made a loss, in other words. That value is subjective, and it's because people think that other people might value a thing that directs their labour. But only if they make a profit, that is, they're rewarded for good decisions, or they make a loss, that is, they're punished for bad decisions, can we make decisions at all. We can only calculate if there are profits and losses. If we just said, well, anyone's labour is equal, no one would know what to even labour on. So this was worked out basically in the 1600s and earlier. Even something else that the early Austrians gave us, Menger and so on, was marginal utility. That we don't value water based on the usefulness of all water. We value water based on the usefulness of the marginal unit of water. That is, if you're dying of thirst in the desert, you'd give anything for 1 cup of water. If you're in the middle of a fresh stream, water has virtually no price attached to it, right? Because it's super abundant in the middle of a fresh stream. It's that marginal unit that's important. So, Turgot, as the limelight shifted to the French in the 1700s, this is a good decade before Adam Smith. He says, water, in spite of its necessity and the multitude of pleasures which it provides for man, is not regarded as a precious thing in a well-watered country. Man does not seek to gain its possession, since its abundance of this element allows him to find it all around him. And another French around that time, Cantillon, had explored thoroughly the role and the value of entrepreneurs as being the people who have a suspicion that other people might value a thing and expend their own energies and take risk upon themselves in order to bring that thing to the market, hoping to make a profit. The successful ones are rewarded and do more of that. The ones that guess wrong are punished. And so other entrepreneurs learn to do less of that thing. So they call this the Adam Smith problem because Adam Smith knew all of this. This was all very well developed before Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations. And Adam Smith had even taught on this himself in earlier lectures that were never published during his own lifetime, but were published later. So in his lectures, Smith had solved the value paradox neatly, in much the same way as had other economists for centuries. But in The Wealth of Nations, for some bizarre reason, all of this drops out and falls away. Suddenly, only 10 or a dozen years after the lectures, Smith finds himself unable to solve the value paradox. Smith sharply and hermetically separates and sunders utility from price and value, and never the twain shall meet. It was rediscovered by the Austrians a century after Smith, but by this stage the English classical school were the in crowd. They were the cool guys. And the Austrians were some weirdo, bizarre people in Europe, right? So Adam Smith said things like, the word value has two different meanings now. Sometimes expresses the utility of some particular object, and sometimes the power in purchasing other goods, which the possession of that object conveys. The one may be called value in use, the other value in exchange. The things which have the greatest value in use, he cited things like water, very useful and important things, frequently have little or no value in exchange. Doesn't buy you much. And he cited things like diamonds as being a mere frippery, that is just something that women adorn themselves with for earthly pleasures, as being something that has very little value or no value in use, but seems to have high value in exchange, and therefore there's something wrong. This is a weird concept which had already been discredited. And that is that, says Rothbard. Utility can no longer explain value and price, and the two sundered concepts will reappear in later generations as left-wingers and socialists, like my little picture, happily prate about the crucial difference between production for profit, bad, and production for use, noble. The air of the Smithian emphasis on the alleged gulf between value in use and value in exchange. So if you asked like the average person that has no training in economics whatsoever, to name two economists, they would probably name Adam Smith as one and Karl Marx as another. And they would probably, in their concept, put them at different poles. Adam Smith, the free market guy, the capitalist guy, Karl Marx, the communist guy. Everybody else must be somewhere in between on that spectrum. Whereas Rothbard in this volume says basically that Adam Smith was the forebear of Karl Marx. That this is where economic thought took a diversion and went wrong, and led to Keynesianism and Marxism and every other ism. So Smith again, this is Smith talking, not Marx. The real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. In other words, the labour is what gives it value, right? What everything is worth to the man who has acquired it and who wants to dispose of it or exchange it for something else is the toil and trouble which it can save to himself or which it can impose on other people. They contain the value of a certain quantity of labour. But somehow it's infused within the thing. This quantity of labour, the amount of hours you spent digging for the rock is somehow infused into that rock. For what is supposed at the time to contain the value of an equal quantity. And this is which led to Marxism, which led Marx later on. This is Rothbard again. Smith concluded that the natural price is equal to and determined by the cost of production. It was indeed Adam Smith who was almost solely responsible for the injection into economics of the labour theory of value, and hence it was Smith who may plausibly be held responsible for the emergence and the momentous consequences of Marxism. I didn't say that myself. Murray Rothbard said that, all right, so it must be true. It's very easy to discredit this theory that things are infused with the amount of labour that went into them, unless you can explain how this Andy Warhol painting 2 weeks ago suddenly absorbed an extra $104 million worth of labour. When the guy that painted it is dead. And it's already changed hands I don't know how many times, but it was already paid for. Whatever labour he put into that, he was paid for it the first time it sold, right? And it's resold again for $104 million. If value isn't subjective, how did that painting absorb value from the labour that was put into it? I don't know. They can't explain that. So what classical economics tries to do, what Smithian or English classical economics tries to come up with the sort of models that Vinay was talking about before. The floating distraction, as Vinay called it, that there are households and there are firms and there's this circular flow. There's a market for goods and services. Your spending becomes the revenue of firms. Firms pay that back to you as wages or as rents or as profits. And so the money just goes around. Very simple, nice little model. And back the other way goes the actual goods themselves, the factors of production and the goods. This is what they call the circular flow. This is one of the first models that you'll see in an economics textbook, right? And there are many others, as we know. But this works, so to speak, in a static world. If the world were to stay the same, that is, as producers, we work in the horseshoe blacksmith shop making horseshoes. And as consumers, we consume horseshoes. If the world just stayed like that, that would be a neat explanation, right? The money you spend on horseshoes gets paid back to you as wages from the horseshoe shop, right? So that's quite, there's nothing wrong with that, is there? It seems quite plausible if you freeze the world right there. It's a circular flow. Or if you consume cassettes, by day you work in the cassette tape factory, and by night you consume cassette tapes. And so the money that you spend on cassettes comes back to you as wages from the cassette factory. No problem whatsoever. But there is a problem with that, right? There is a problem. If you assume the world to be static like that, you can solve problems in lots of different ways. You can say, if there's, say, some unemployment, is that because there's not enough demand for cassettes, or there's not enough supply of cassettes? Well, you can answer that, you can pick an answer, whichever you want, because it's the same money, the same people. We just stimulate demand, that's the Keynesian response, and that money will go from the consumer to the cassette factory back to the consumer, and it's all not. Or if you're a supply side, I say the government just needs to step in and promote more supply. But still, it's the same people. They'll get the money as producers and consumers. Supply and demand, instead of being someone's subjective valuation of things, has become, well, we're suppliers over this side and we're consumers over this side, so we supply ourselves and we demand from ourselves. It's all a neat little abstraction, right? The trouble with the real world is, how do we deal with innovation and change? What if people don't want cassettes anymore? That is the terrible question. What if people don't want horseshoes anymore? Don't ask that question, all right? We like the world to be frozen in a static state because we can more easily answer any questions that you like if the world were like that. So we try to pretend that the world is frozen to make our models anyway. And to say that any change, well, okay, we know that there is change. We acknowledge that things do change. But in our model, at least, there's this long-run equilibrium. And if only we could just look past all the changes, if only we could just assume them away or ignore them or whatever, we could look through that to that long-run equilibrium in the sky, and we'd say that's the true value of things. This changing value in the marketplace every day, boy, how much data would you have to consume to work it out? But let's collect data, because that gives jobs to lots of economists and econometricians and people. Let's crunch as much data as we can. Let's try to collect all of that and look for that true price, that long-run equilibrium price. So classical economics is like a quest for something that's not real. Austrian economics is about the real world. It's about, the model isn't central, human action is central. What's central to Austrian economics is what really happens. What really happens is people go out and not wanting to buy a pizza, but they smell the nice smell from the pizza shop and decide, I'll have a pizza. So that markets do tend towards equilibrium. That is, if there's an oversupply of something, the price will go down. If there's an undersupply, the price will go up. Markets tend towards equilibrium, but the equilibrium itself is a moving target all the time. It's not a true value. It's not the real value of things that should somehow be infused in the DNA of every rock and every pizza. It's a moving target. So what Austrians try to do is to explain the consequences of human action. To say, if you buy more pizzas, pizza shop owners will become more profitable and more people will want to become pizza shop owners. We're explaining that that's a plausible sequence of events, but we're not trying to say the true proper amount of pizza or the proper value of pizza, because there just isn't one. So therefore, entrepreneurs are central. Entrepreneurs are central to the process of discovering value, of avoiding the things that are loss-making and doing more of the things that are value-creating. But if you take away the centrality of the customer's subjective and changing value, then we don't need entrepreneurs really. Entrepreneurs just get in the way. And you're open to any economic theory at all. So these models, going back to Adam Smith, can lead to basically any economic theory you want, except Austrianism. It can lead to things like Krugman, don't worry about the text there, but basically saying that after 9/11, well, we're going to need some more office buildings, and that's going to create more work. And doing work is all important. Not creating value, just doing work, because it's doing work that gives things value somehow, which we can just tell is wrong, right? The goal of humans is to create value, to make life more livable, not just to do work. Actually, we'd like to do it to live a nice life with as little work as possible. That's how we started, isn't it? We say we don't need the kids to work because we can create enough value just in our in-between years. So, pulling those two things together, I'll try and get through the next bit a bit quicker, but I just want to think a little bit about the sort of work ethic that we teach. The work ethic, basically coming from the labour theory of value, that doing work is the thing that's important. Do you see a man who excels in his work? He will stand before kings. He will not stand before unknown men. And this is basically what well-meaning parents try to instill in their children. Just get good grades. Just work hard at school. Just get into university. Just get a good job. We don't know what you should do in life. We don't know what job. But whatever you do, just work really hard. Because if you really work really hard at whatever you do, you'll rise to the top and you might work for the king. Because the king has lots of money. If he wants a tailor, he'll get the best tailor. If he wants an economist, he'll get the best economist. Or whatever it is. So just work hard. That's the work ethic. That's the static world solution. That's the labour theory of value solution. What I'm more interested in is a service ethic, or a productive work ethic, or a purposeful work ethic. So, the words of Jesus here, you know, those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. And we can interpret that as all of the rulers that we know of in our modern day world. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. That is, work out what other people want and do that for other people. And that's what entrepreneurs do. Someone who serves other people, an entrepreneur has to figure out what other people want and do that thing. It's a figuring out process, not just a hard work process, but doing the right work, purposeful work. And whoever desires to be first shall be the slave of all. That is, the small-time entrepreneur, the yacht cleaning contractor, serves a few people, a few rich people. The small company that does pay-by-month Christmas hampers serves a few poor people, because it's something that poor people want in their own valuation. But the big brands like Kellogg's or Nike or McDonald's or Apple or even Ferrari, you'll see their products in just about every home, rich or poor. Maybe not Ferrari cars, but at least Ferrari hats or shirts or something with that brand on it. Poor people like that just as much as rich people, right? So those who have become great are those who have served the most people. And so this is, I'll just finish with a few Mises quotes, just to show you that this is very compatible with Austrianism. The direction of all economic affairs is the task in the market society, is the task of the entrepreneurs. Theirs is the control of production. They seem like pretty important people, but they are at the helm and steer the ship, and a superficial observer would believe that they are supreme, but they are not. They are bound to obey unconditionally the captain's orders. The captain is the consumer. Entrepreneurs are people who serve. The consumers, by their buying or abstention from buying, ultimately determine what should be produced and in what quantity and quality. They render profitable the affairs of those businessmen who comply with their wishes, and unprofitable the affairs of those who do not produce what they are asking for most urgently. In the free market, it's service that's rewarded. The free market is indifferent to emotions. Are greedy businessmen rewarded? Based on their greed, the market is indifferent. It neither rewards greed nor punishes it. It's indifferent. We don't even know whether you're greedy or not. That's very subjective. Whether you serve people is what the market rewards. If you're producing something that people want, you're rewarded, regardless of your emotions at the time. Profits convey control of the factors of production into the hands of those who are employing them for the best possible satisfaction of the most urgent needs of the consumers. And losses withdraw them from the control of inefficient businessmen. In a market economy not sabotaged by the government, the owners of property are the mandataries under the mandate of the consumers. And one last quote, this time from Jeffrey Tucker, from an article that I love called "Show Love to the Merchant Class." This is where he talks about the airport. You get through the government barrier where they're rude to you, the security officers, where they don't have to have any customer service, where the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over you, the great ones exercise authority over you. That's the airport security officials, right? Once you get past that, a whole world of airport commerce opens up, where you have all of these cafes, you have jewellery stores, you have liquor stores, you have all of these shops, and they serve you with a smile. Even if you don't buy from them, they're still friendly to you. They're still nice to you. Even if you're rude to them, they're still nice to you. The class of people who have chosen the path of persuasion over coercion are deserving of our gratitude even when we don't buy from them. The merchant class is that which makes everything possible in our lives: our home, our food, our medical care, our clothing, our air conditioning, our computers, our music listening, absolutely everything that makes daily life tolerable and joyful. So that's the sort of ethic that we want to instill in our kids: a purposeful work ethic, a service ethic, not just a hard work ethic. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
We have time for maybe just one question.
With all due respect, I think you're a little hard on Adam Smith. Relying on Murray Rothbard as the critic is fair enough, but might I suggest that Murray Rothbard himself is not beyond mistakes and criticism, and insofar as equating Murray Rothbard necessarily with the Austrian viewpoint, Mises was aware of the criticism and in fact endorsed Adam Smith with qualifications, which he attributed to the fact that he was writing 200 or 300 years beforehand. After all, Smith did make a dramatic change in the economic systems that were applicable before him, or at least he's credited with that, and insofar as he convinced government to take positive steps, he did so.
Okay. I'll take that, and I won't debate that point, because that's a massive question that we'd have to read volumes and volumes to be able to drill down on. I'll just say one thing that Murray Rothbard says in his introduction, whether he's right or wrong, let's put that to one side, but he says in his introduction, we're not criticising Adam Smith anachronistically. That is, we're not criticising him against future knowledge that we have. That would be unfair on the man. We're criticising him against knowledge that was around at the time, from Turgot, from Cantillon, from the scholastics, right back to Aristotle. We're critiquing him against information that he himself knew and he himself taught on. That's Rothbard's point, but we won't have time to fully explore that question. I'll take your objection on that.
All right, would you thank Mark Hornshaw?